Don't you hate it when you're playing a video game and all of a sudden the game expects you to press buttons? Like, what the hell is all this? I actually gotta do shit at a video game? Come on, man, what the frick? Well, that, my friends, is difficulty, which is what separates games from most other consumable media. I mean, unless you're me, of course, reading is actually kinda really hard. Being presented with a challenge that you gotta struggle with and then overcome and then being rewarded for it is kind of the whole, well, everything about video games. And those challenges can be as simple as pressing a button a couple of times to make a house, or as complicated as, well, hey, you know that thing that requires you to do a bunch of super tight controller inputs in a row, and you know how it took you like 4 hours to get through it the first time, even though the segment itself only lasts like a solid minute on a successful run? Can you do that again, but also with the entire rest of the level without making a single mistake? That'd be awesome, thanks. So yeah, needless to say, there's a bunch of ways you can make challenges for your player, and well, we're gonna discuss that. There's a few pieces that contribute to this so-called challenge loop, but we're gonna start at the very core of it all. What does the game expect you to do? Trademark. There's so many possible answers to this question that I cannot possibly talk about all of them while still leaving enough time in my lifespan for, well, literally any other goals or plans. So we're gonna have to do some generalization. The three categories that I have settled on are knowledge, preparation, and mechanical skills. And I want to say that like 99% of all games will have some mix of these three for literally all of their challenges. Now, I am sure that you are a smart individual, you are watching one of my videos after all, and that you could think of 1,000 examples that don't cleanly fit into these boxes. But I don't care, this is my video, and this is how we're gonna do it. Alright, enough with the introductory rambling. Let's start with knowledge, meaning, well, the things you gotta know or figure out. The obvious first example here is puzzle games, but it also applies to a bunch of other things like knowing that this enemy is weak to this type of move, or studying a boss's attack patterns, or running some numbers to figure out what's the best to do in your current situation, or yeah, just traditional puzzles, so they'll just be easier to explain for now. I personally like to arbitrarily put most puzzles into two categories. Puzzles where you have all the pieces and just have to arrange them in the right way, and the puzzles where you gotta find the pieces themselves. I personally much prefer the first one. You know what your end goal is, and you know what you're capable of doing. You just gotta use your brain to use the tools to get to the end. I find the other type can be pretty frustrating in comparison. Take, for example, the star Blast Away the Wall from Super Mario 64. All you really know is that the star is somewhere in this level, and it somehow involves breaking a wall. The intended solution is to use this cannon and to shoot Mario at this particular corner of this particular wall. There's no indicators that this piece of wall is any more breakable than any other wall, and there's no other instances in the game where you can break a wall with a cannon either. The fact that the cannon is involved at all isn't even hinted at, so how is a new player expected to reach the end of this challenge other than the try everything you could think of until something eventually works method? It's what I like to call an obtuse puzzle. There's no hints or direction that allows the player to figure it out. The game mostly just expects you to do something that the average player wouldn't ever think to do unless they feel like they've exhausted all logical and reasonable options. And extending off of this, puzzles stemming from real-world knowledge are risky tools to use as well, as you can never really be too sure about what exactly the player knows. People are really fucking stupid sometimes. Of course, not to pretend that user error isn't a thing. If you don't know that fire puts out water, then, well, that's on you. But, well, as a Canadian with French roots, it's obvious to me that heating up maple syrup and pouring it on snow makes taffy. But I can't reasonably expect the majority of people on Earth to know that, or to even have the insight to piece together that without guidance. You can kinda see what I'm saying here, right? Of course, it is a matter of opinion, and after all, traditional puzzles like that aren't a super common form of knowledge-based challenge anyways. Most of the time, like as in 90% of games, learning how the game mechanics work is a major part of the gameplay loop. As everyone who has watched game design discussion videos on YouTube knows, a good game will typically show you new mechanics in a controlled environment first, so that the player can get experience with the thing without being punished by it, before the game slowly elaborates on the mechanics. But this style of teaching isn't the end-all be-all. In fact, the entire genre of roguelikes tend to revolve around throwing a bunch of shit at you that you won't understand, and then learning from that harsh environment piece by piece as you throw yourself at it again and again. In fact, a lot of games that are known for being hard simply require a lot of trial and error, and once you've gained the necessary knowledge on how the game functions, victory is near guaranteed. Not to say that this is a bad thing, of course, it's simply a different style of game. I believe trial and error is completely fair game as long as the player can reasonably learn what the error is within a few attempts. And of course, as long as it's made clear to the player that trial and error is a major part of the game, because it is an understandingly frustrating approach to a lot of people. Now, let's say that you have a returning player to a game that heavily uses knowledge-based challenge. How do you prevent them from just holding W through the whole game? Well, one way is to introduce another one of my categories, namely preparation. Anytime the game requires you to do things like gathering supplies, grinding for EXP, doing a certain number of side quests or whatever, that's preparation. The game will have artificial gates or difficulty spikes that are patched by in-game items, abilities, or whatever. Basically, any kind of reward that isn't necessarily hard to get, but is mostly just time-consuming. RPGs especially love to use this type of challenge. And if you think that sounds boring, well, you're not alone in that. If used in excess, preparation-based challenges can feel like an absolute slog. There's also another issue with preparation. If you allow the player to freely prepare forever with no consequence other than time wasted, the difficulty curve may just be flattened way beyond what it's supposed to be. I believe that a game that implements preparation-based challenges properly should have these 3 bullet points checked. Don't use it in excess, have other types of challenges present as well. Make the rewards feel, well, rewarding, and have some measure to prevent or inhibit over-preparation. Bonus points if the preparation itself contains some other form of challenge directly implemented. An awesome example of this is Risk of Rain 2. The name of the game is gathering items to make yourself more powerful, but items alone aren't going to win runs. The player needs to be able to perform well in combat on their own no matter what. Gathering items is directly gated behind killing monsters that are constantly spawning in. And once you get those items, they feel powerful and worthwhile without trivializing the combat. On top of all this, the strength of the monsters is directly tied to how much time has passed. If you spend too much extra time scouring every corner of the map looking for chests, you're probably going to be worse off than you would have been if you just only grabbed a few items that were close by and convenient and then got a move on. Smooth and clever transition, the final category is mechanical skill, which basically just boils down to pressing the good buttons at the good times. Platformers, shooters, basically anything that you could label as action falls into this category. This should be pretty intuitive, and to be honest, I don't think I can explain it any further without sounding super pretentious. So I'm just gonna trust that you get what I'm trying to say here. So we've established what challenges look like, but what do they actually mean to the flow of the game? Completing challenges allow for the game to progress, but what if you fail to do them? What I find to be the defining factor of a game's difficulty is not the nature of the challenges themselves, but more so what happens when you fail to complete them. In, 99% of all games, failure means death. Even if it's not directly labeled death, come on, that's clearly a death. Of course, not every mistake you make in every game is going to result in immediate death. More than likely, you'll just be drained of health and or forced to use some sort of resource. Once you are out of resources, and for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to label health as a resource, then you tend to die or faint or whatever other substitute for mortality the developers came up with. The number of mistakes that you have to make in order to reach that point is often a large factor in how hard a game feels. Not to claim that Mario Odyssey is harder than Spelunky 2, to simplify difficulty down to just the numerical amount of health the game provides you with would be outright stupid. I'm more so trying to point in the general direction of the less room for error you have, the harder the game is. Spelunky 2, on average, has way more things that can fuck you over than any Mario game made in the last 15 years. Okay, so you died like an idiot. What comes next? You tend to get sent back to the last checkpoint. Where that checkpoint actually is the last portion of what makes a game hard. Sorry, I meant to say hard. The exasperation with that stems from what seems to be a somewhat popular trend in games where you have to lose considerable amounts of progress upon dying. I've heard many people claim that the threat of losing progress helps the game feel high octane, and also makes victories feel more rewarding. And while I do believe that save points can feel incredibly rewarding, I feel that mostly applies to games that have a slower, more methodical gameplay loop like Resident Evil 2 or Majora's Mask. In faster-paced, mechanical-centric games, however, having checkpoints too far away from each other can be incredibly frustrating. Why should I have to redo all of this shit that I have already proved that I could get past? It only really serves to pad out the game and artificially lengthen the time it takes to beat it. Putting checkpoints before every challenge doesn't really remove the difficulty. In fact, it mostly just tightens up the game by keeping the new challenges coming and keeping the focus on what the player actually cares about. Now, I've also heard many people express the opinion that a game being too short is undesirable, which I totally get. Games aren't cheap, but I do have a couple of issues with this all the same. First of all, a good game dev is going to fill up the game with more genuine, original content anyway. And second, if you're only concerned about your wallet, well, there's plenty of free games out there that can last you months or years, and some of them are even good. So surely we can all agree that padding the game out like this is an objectively bad thing, right? Alright, let's get this shit back on track. So, the big, conveniently summarizing question is, what makes a game hard? And, well, unfortunately for you, my answer to that isn't really satisfying. It doesn't really matter. Most games that are designed with fair trial and punishment in mind can be beaten by pretty much anyone, save for maybe those who are unfortunately disabled in a way that makes it physically impossible. Sure, some may take much longer than others, but a game that does its job right will equip the player, no matter who they are, with the tools they need to complete the experience. I believe what matters much more is whether the player enjoys the style of challenges, punishment, and reward that the game presents. To simply label a game hard or easy ignores so much of the nuance of what makes up the game. And I know I might as well be speaking to a brick wall with this, but I think we should communicate about how punishing games are and how much wiggle room the games allow, rather than how quote-unquote hard they are. Some of you are almost certainly thinking, those are literally the same thing, stopping a pretentious bastard, you pretentious bastard. And yeah, on some level they are the same concepts. But the method I'm suggesting is significantly more clear and concise with what one can expect from a game. Nearly everyone can agree that Celeste and Dark Souls are both hard games. But almost anyone who's familiar with both will agree with me when I say that they are both challenging in very different ways. I mean, Celeste is constantly encouraging the player to push forward and persevere, while Dark Souls literally has the prepare to die edition. At the end of the day, all forms of challenges, punishment, whatever, it's all fair game. The only condition that I think is needed is proper communication with the audience about what the game expects from the player. And that includes directly, indirectly, within the game, and within the advertising and store page. Even with Lisa, a game chock full of unfair and brutally punishing game design decisions that would make most game design professors wince. Because these design choices are shown to be intentionally unfair, both indirectly through the narrative and the world, and directly through the game's advertisement, Lisa is free to flourish as an objectively good, dare I say, incredible game. And, of course, dear viewers, proper communication is important in all other facets of life as well. Perhaps we should all practice proper communication to make all of our lives less challenging. And perhaps, if you practice hard enough, I'll manage to make more than one video every 2 months. And if that ends up being the case, well, I guess that means I'll see you soon.